90% of dementia cases are in women is because your hormones that are meant to benefit you can cause inflammation if you're not doing the activity that your hormones are designed for. 90% of the $4.3 trillion healthcare budget in the United States is spent on chronic disease management.
What if your DNA held the key to reversing chronic illness and unlocking your full potential? Kashif Khan, founder of the DNA company, has made it his mission to revolutionize personalized medicine by decoding the human genome. From his upbringing in Vancouver to uncovering the genetic pathways shaping health and success.
I was sick. I went through our sick care system. I didn't know what it was until I finally needed it. And all I was getting was, here's what your thing is called, and here's the pill you need. When I would ask, why did it happen? Didn't get an answer. And so I started to go on this journey of self-discovery of what's actually going on. And I realized there's a whole world of things that we thought were alternative, which were the original medicine that actually do root cause. The belief was, just like any other lab report, the testing company's job is to test. Really what was missing is, where's the interpretation? So I needed to do that for myself to fix my problems, and so it regurgitated back as something that is a tool that everybody could use.
Kashif's journey is about more than science. It's about transforming lives. Through the Unpilled podcast, he's making genomics accessible, inspiring a healthier, more empowered future.
The last bit that people need to know is that some things that you think are healthy that is good for somebody else is actually bad for you. Some people decide to go to a keto diet when their genes actually don't allow them to do that, and they're gonna get sick from that thing.
Welcome to Success Story. I'm your host, Scott Clary. The Success Story podcast is part of the HubSpot podcast network. HubSpot not only supports the show, but they support entrepreneurs. That's why I'm such a huge fan of HubSpot. And I'm very grateful for HubSpot for supporting the show because they help entrepreneurs. And as a fellow entrepreneur, I know it takes a lot to grow your business, a lot of audience attracting, a lot of sales, a lot of marketing, a lot of lead scoring, a lot of channel management, a lot of content, a lot of long days, late nights, a lot of weekends, a lot of wishing there was an easier way, but there is. With Breeze, this is HubSpot's new collection of AI tools. It's easier than ever for marketers, for entrepreneurs to attract audiences, to increase leads, to score customers, and to close deals fast, which means pretty soon your company will have a lot to celebrate. Visit HubSpot.com/marketers to learn more. Gosh, I'm excited you're here, all the way from my hometown, actually.
Yeah, okay.
So it's going to be fun, but to sort of like go through your life and some inflection points that have led you to where you are today. So you transitioned from very successful marketing career, successful entrepreneur, to a genomics company, and now you actually help people understand sort of inside what's making them tick, exactly what they're predisposed to, their DNA, all the things that I think could be a little bit scary for people to look into and understand and realize. When you look at your career, what was this pivotal moment that led you to go down this path?
So it's actually the same as a lot of sort of functional health stories. If you talk to a person that's amazing at fixing Lyme disease, amazing at fixing the gut, it's usually because their gut was broken or they had Lyme disease and they needed to figure it out. So I was sick. I went through our sick care system. I didn't know what it was until I finally needed it. And all I was getting was, here's what your thing is called, and here's the pill you need. And when I would ask, why did it happen? Didn't get an answer. And I honestly didn't even know that that's not what doctors did, right? And so I started to go on this journey of self-discovery of what's actually going on biologically. Traditional Chinese medicine, naturopathy, osteopathy, homeopathy, all this other stuff. And I realized there's a whole world of things that we thought were alternative, which were the original medicine that actually do root cause. And the big aha moment for me was when I got into my genome and I finally found out why, when my business partner, who I lived in the same neighborhood, ate lunch with, worked with, like same environment, same lifestyle, same everything, wasn't sick, and I was, which convinced me that it was real, I learned that there was genetic gaps and holes that I had where those same environments, same food, same lifestyle, I was not able to tolerate, and he was. And that's why I got sick. And so I made adjustments, and all of a sudden the eczema that kept my eyes sealed shut was gone. The psoriasis where like I would bleed on my knuckles was gone. Migraines gone, gut issues gone, depression gone, all gone.
Everything's gone just by optimizing the way that you were built.
Yeah.
And what prompted you to identify that it was something in your DNA, in your basically like in your core composition that was different than somebody else? Like, is there before you built the DNA company, before you sort of championed this idea, was this a practice of medicine at all?
So the functional medicine now exists. So medicine is here's diagnosis and prescription. Functional medicine is, why did you get sick? Let's try and prevent it. Let's get to the root. So root cause.
Functional medicine doesn't look at DNA, does it?
They all sorts of functional
Okay.
testing, gut testing, mycotoxins, biotoxins, and DNA. But even then, the DNA tests were, the belief was, just like any other lab report, the testing company's job is to test. Really, what was missing is where's the interpretation? Most people will get a genetic report and it's like gibberish. What does this all mean? What was missing is, how do I apply this? What's wrong and how do I fix it? It should be that simple and easy. So I needed to do that for myself to fix my problems. And so it regurgitated back as something that is a tool that everybody could use.
And then what do you actually start to see when you do this DNA testing? I mean, the first version of this, you were trying to figure it out yourself. Was there a company that did this for you, or were you just trying to figure it out yourself? You partnered with a lab somewhere?
So I found a brilliant scientist in Toronto who was actually working on this research, but as a scientist didn't understand how to make it easy for people, right? PhD building a tool for PhDs, which is how PhDs think. So what I saw, that big aha moment for me was, there's a gene called GSTM1, and it's a primary driver of glutathione activity in your gut. So glutathione is this antioxidant that removes toxins from your chemicals, plastics, pesticides, all sorts of toxins from your body. And you would think like genes are what version I have, what variant, what mutation, where did you hear? I don't have the gene, entirely missing from my genetic code. So the same Mediterranean hummus type food that me and my business partner were eating for lunch every day, thinking that it was healthy, Mediterranean diet, there's certain chemicals used to dry chickpeas to shrink them faster so that they could turn around the yield of the farm faster to get them out to market faster. Potent toxin for me, most people just pee it out, right? Because I literally don't have this first line of defense to neutralize that toxin. So over time, leaky gut, eczema, and over time also autoimmunity, psoriasis, it led to all of this stuff.
So maybe even help people understand through evolution or biology, why would you not have that?
So when we think about evolution, I also believe that this is the way to look at things, right? Genetics will tell us that's the way to look at things. But the truth is, for most genes, there's a couple possible variations. And it's a bit of a Russian roulette. What did mom and dad give me? Different versions, and we end up at different, but there's kind of a cycle that we keep going through. The same versions are passed on and on and on. There's no change. There's no new versions. There's no new evolution. So it's random. It's literally random. Unless you have a population where, for example, in China, you have two ethnicities. You have the Han Chinese, and then you have another form, the large Mongolian, big head, big body, and then the very thin Bruce Lee prototype, right? Strong, lean. That's China, literally two ethnicities. So when you have it that close, you maintained those genes. But when you move to somewhere like the United States, where it's a melting pot and everything's mixing, right? You're no longer wired for your local environment. And this is why when you look at the blue zones where people live forever, they're not here, other than there's one in California that has to do with,
yeah, that's, I think, one of the last ones left.
Yeah, it's one of the, and that has to do with their habits around religion, beliefs, purpose. But the food, environment, lifestyle of those local people hasn't changed a lot, and that hasn't stopped being aligned to their DNA, right?
Okay, so because the U.S. is a melting pot, and all these different ethnicities, all these different people getting together, so this is why we all have these like random variations of genetics, and really nobody really knows what they have, unless you're testing your parents, I'm assuming, and nobody's really even doing that. So then you could have these chronic conditions that you have no idea why you have them. And in traditional healthcare, like you said, it's just sick care. You're giving pills, prescriptions to solve it, but it's not actually being solved. So a lot of people, I mean, you probably encounter this. A lot of people are probably living their whole life with chronic conditions, and they have no recourse, or they don't think they have recourse. And this is kind of the work that you do.
Yeah.
Okay, I understand. Okay, so then if you talk about like your own journey, just walk me through. I know you have a great story about when you were like dealing with a whole bunch of paint fumes, and this is what was causing the issue. And I think that really paints like a really clear picture for how, what's the best way to say this? Like, you didn't even know the environment was causing this stress, this really toxic result on your body. So walk us through that story, because I think that's a very interesting story, and I think it's also a little bit scary. But then we can sort of talk about the potential, like the potential for testing and understanding, like, is our environment actually hurting us, or is it something that's conducive to our health and well-being? But start with your story because it's interesting.
So your genes are essentially instructions. So you have 50 trillion cells in your body. Every single one has this instruction manual inside. The various cells read the relevant section to know how to do their jobs, from making hormones to removing toxins to metabolizing foods into things that your cells can actually use, right? All these jobs are driven by the specific instructions. Sometimes there's spelling mistakes, paragraphs missing, and so the job happens at a different level, right? So and on top of that is your environment, your nutrition, and your lifestyle. So what you said earlier about chronic disease, this is why it's caused and developed, but it's not innate, it's not hereditary. It's you have some genetic code that's broken. Add on top of that the stress, the bad food, the chemicals, whatever it is, the one thing that you weren't genetically wired for that can trigger the inflammation that leads to that eventual disease. It's a combination of hardware. I'm not wired properly, like you might have bad cardiovascular hardware. Doesn't matter unless you cause the inflammation to trigger cardiovascular failure. Otherwise, living on a beach in Aruba, no stress, eating fish out of the sea, you're not getting the cardiovascular disease with the exact same genetics. So that's what I discovered with myself, which was I walk into our building. We're building literally a compounding lab to custom make supplement protocols for people based on their DNA. And in that, we're using this epoxy to build what's called a clean room, like a lab where you see those white walls in the movies, right? It's called, right? So the glue that is deemed as safe, that where I live, Health Canada allows utilization of, they're testing on the average population, right? Go test 1,000 people, and if 5 get sick, no problem. But I'm one of the 5. So as opposed to this big picture clinical data model we have, which is one size fits all, trial and error, hopefully it works for you, and it worked on 7 out of 10 people, that's good enough. What about the 3 that it didn't work for? And if I'm one of those 3 for that particular context of this epoxy glue, and when it enters my body, I am not able to remove it effectively. So it lingers and lingers and causes inflammation. And that's when my eczema peaked. So I already have leaky gut causing inflammation. Then I add this additional layer of environmental toxin that I'm not able to remove from my body, that everybody else, there was a team of these, there was this Irish crew, right? That's what they do day in and day out every day, that didn't get sick because they're genetically wired to push it out of their body, right? They don't have this issue that I have. I'm genetically missing that ability. So I got sick and once again blamed the sickness. So once I learned all this, I started to do 2 things: remove the threats, the things that my body can't tolerate, and add the right nutrients to fortify the broken biology. I don't need to take every supplement in the world. I need to take exactly what makes up for the genes that don't work. And then it's as if they do work and I don't have the problem anymore.
So you're saying that with proper supplementation, you can actually fix these gaps?
It's a combination of nutrients. So what are you eating, food, supplements, and your lifestyle and environment. It's these 3 buckets. And really, we got it backwards, where we believe genetics is, you have a risk of this, now go to your doctor. It's more like genetics is, here's what's broken, now here's what your habit should be. If you have this set of habits, you're going to thrive. If you have this set of habits, here's exactly where disease will come from. And it truly becomes optional at that point how you're going to feel.
I mean, I've heard you speak about Alzheimer's and dementia quite a bit, and I'm predisposed to that, I think, to some degree, because I think my grandpa got it, and I actually did a DNA test of some sort. I can't remember which one it was, but it was showing like that was like the one thing that I should look out for. And I've thought about like lifestyle changes and food and whatnot, but I've never really considered environment. And I've never even thought that there's supplementation that could completely, or with a high degree of success, find a way to sort of push off or delay Alzheimer's, dementia. So you're saying that, like, I'm sure you know a lot about this. There are like supplement combinations, if you are in the proper environment and your health and wellness is sort of on point, that you can actually push this off even if you're predisposed to it.
Perfect example of what is believed as possible, even at the medical level. The doctors will tell you have this genetic marker.
Yeah.
It speaks to an elevated risk of dementia. Watch out, right? And the anxiety of that alone will cause the dementia, because that's one of the causes, is high cortisol, right? So we really need to use that more as a priority as opposed to a prescription. What biology actually leads to this outcome? So we reverse engineer. So what do we see? By the way, Chris Hemsworth, Thor, right? We used to do during our research a lot of work on the Marvel movie sets. So the trainers or the stars we'd work with them to build these cocktails to keep people at their best so that, those long shoot days, they had good recovery, good everything, good energy, good sleep. And so because of that, the producer that made the show Limitless, you remember Chris put on the show, right? We were supposed to work on that show on the genetic episode, and then COVID hit, production got shut down. Chris is in Australia. I said, you know what, I'm going to just do it anyway. I'm going to pick up some cameras with my buddies, and that's what he did. So in that episode where he did the genetic test, he was told, you have the ApoE gene, right? The Alzheimer's gene.
I know. That was like a big story. It was a tabloid story. Yeah.
Everybody has the gene. What version you have determines what clinicians will say is a very low risk, 8 to 10 times risk, or 17 to 25 times risk of getting dementia versus the average population. If you ask that doctor that told Chris that, and I literally sent an email to the producer saying, I just watched this episode, this is nonsense. There's so much more, right? Here's what I told him. That yes, this gene is linked to people that have Alzheimer's because we only study things in a disease-centric setting. Pharma companies don't study healthy people to ask them why they didn't get sick. They study people with a disease and figure out what genes are tied to it because that helps them make pills, right? But that's too late. What does this gene do? This gene is responsible for lipid transport, so moving cholesterol in your body, literally moving it around.
So everybody has this.
Everybody has this gene, right? If you have inflammation in your brain, this gene is then responsible to send cholesterol there to fight the inflammation. Cholesterol is a very beneficial hormone that fixes things all over your body. It's also, a root for your sex hormones like testosterone, etc. It's also good for your brain, right? If you have the bad transport tool, you don't do a good job of transport. And so when you have the inflammation, the cholesterol deployed, it's easier for some to get left behind, I should say, and start to build what we call amyloid plaque, this plaque in your brain. That plaque starts to choke at the brain cells, kill the brain cells, and eventually lead to cognitive decline and a behavior that a doctor will call Alzheimer's. But if you actually reverse engineer it, step one, why did I have inflammation in my brain? Right? If that didn't happen, I didn't need to worry about what version of this gene that I had, which only comes from disease-centric thinking, which is where research money goes, right?
I understand.
So what causes the brain inflammation? Do you have leaky gut, like I did, which is why I had brain fog and depression? Toxins exiting your gut wall, crossing the blood-brain barrier, causing brain inflammation. That's one big cause. Do you have high stress, constant high cortisol, which is another source of brain inflammation? You need to tone that down. Metabolically dysfunctional. What are you eating, and what are your unique genetics saying about your ability to process those things? Some people decide to become a vegan. Some people decide to go on a keto diet when their genes actually don't allow them to do that, and they're going to get sick from that thing, right? Fourth is environmental. And this is probably the big underlying one that most people don't realize. There's a gentleman named Dr. Tom O'Brien, who's one of the sort of pioneers of the functional medicine movement. And he did some research in California and said that 66% of California's dementia is based on what people are breathing. 1 hour of LA traffic is an equivalent to a pack of cigarettes in terms of the amount of inflammation it causes, right? So when you do that day in and day out, the brain inflammation, it just increased. The last one and the big one, this is why 80% of dementia cases are in women, is because your hormones that are meant to benefit you can cause inflammation if you're not doing the activity that your hormones are designed for, right? And some women make toxic estrogens that can reside in your brain, cause inflammation. So all of these 5 things. So when I got your gene results, say we were working back then when you got your thing, I would have said, okay, park this, don't worry. Let's look at these 5 things, right? If we plug the gaps and holes on these 5 things with either the right supplement or the removal of the wrong habit or cleaning up the environment, whatever your priority is, it's not happening. You don't have brain inflammation now, which is why you don't have dementia now, right? Once you get to a certain age, your mitochondria, the energy that's in the brain, starts to also reduce. So the ability to fight the inflammation changes, and that's why it's an old age disease. So if you start to look at all these little pieces of what's the biology actually driving the net outcome, you can work on each step, and then it becomes a choice. You don't need to have this thing that you're told you have a risk for.
So all of these predisposed to cancer, predisposed to heart disease, they're all things that can be mitigated to some degree.
So there is some truth to genetic conditions, right? That is less than 3% of healthcare. According to the CDC, 90% of the $4.3 trillion healthcare budget in the United States is spent on chronic disease management, things that are caused, that we do not need to have. You're not born with it. It's not in you. You cause it. No fault of your own. You didn't know any better. What you ate, what you breathed, the toxic people you're surrounding yourself by, whatever it was, caused the inflammation that caused the disease. So if we can eliminate that, in the United States, of the top 15 reasons why people die, 14 are rooted in inflammation. So if you don't have inflammation, when whatever part of your body, which leads to whatever disease, those are all off the table. And then all of a sudden you go from like you said, this expectation that you get your first chronic disease at 55, which is the American average, second by 65, and you spend the last 15 years of your life in treatment. That is the norm. Versus a few simple tweaks, and all of a sudden you jump from 78 average life expectancy to 90. Like, I don't smoke, I eat clean, I exercise 3 times a week. And this literally, by the way, is a result of a Harvard study. They studied a bunch of 90-year-old plus people, and they said, here's the 5 things. They didn't smoke, they exercised more than 3 days a week, they drank less than 3 drinks a week, they were not obese, and they had a healthy whole food diet. That was it. That got them from 78 to N. The 70 to 90 was 90 with good health, not 78 in a hospital bed.
So without even doing a DNA test, I mean, like if you just adopt these like 5 lifestyle changes, which just seem to be smart, common sense things, so this is already going to fix the majority of the problems in your life and the majority of causes for inflammation.
It's that, remove the modern conveniences that are making us sick.
I was going to say, it seems like our whole life is actually, so it's ironic because everything you just mentioned is so common sense and so easy, but our whole life and most people's lives are shitty food, stressful environment, and we just go through it every single day. And I think that intuitively we always think, oh, I'll get better.
Yeah.
And I'll be less stressed, and I'll work less, and I'll eat better.
And I'll do it later. I'll put it off, right? Yeah. To prevent Alzheimer's in your 60s, you need to start working on your health when you're 35.
Yeah.
Right? Because the chronic disease is not a switch that gets turned on. Over time, your body is able to fight and is resilient at that age and can tone it down. Then all of a sudden the disease wins. And one last thought there is the sort of kicker to all this is, yes, adopt healthy habits. The last bit that people need to know is that some things that you think are healthy that is good for somebody else is actually bad for you.
Right? That's the X factor where you have.
That's the X factor. Yeah. And that's the thing where that's how you get from 90 to 120. If you look at actually our innate cells, aging is the degradation of DNA. So damaged, oxidization, environmental wear and tear. There's these caps on our DNA called telomeres that are like bumpers, wear and tear. They're physically designed to last 120 years. So we know that our cells are designed to last 120 years. That's what we're supposed to get to.
Measuring those can indicate your biological age.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's why we use it for biological age measurement, because we know they're supposed to last to 120. So if we already know that, we know 120 is what we're wired for. And it's supposed to be 120. And you see it.
So we're killing ourselves.
We are taking years away that we already have as a God-given gift.
When somebody says, because I know, I can't remember what your biological age is versus your actual age, but I know that you've sort of reversed the clock on your biological age. And I know like Brian Johnson is doing this as well. And a lot of these like longevity people are trying to reverse the biological age. And we can talk about that because that's a very fascinating topic. And I also want to know what are like the mission critical things to do that versus the spending $2 million a year to do that. There's a wide disparity. And I think that throws people off sometimes. But when you look at reversing your biological age, what is your biological age? First part of that question. And secondly, does that mean that you're repairing your telomeres, or are you, for example, when you reverse your biological age, saying you in particular actually now they're set to last until 130 or 140? Is that technically what you're doing? So
the goal is, and I'm not here trying to live forever, right? I believe there's an afterlife. I'm good to go there, right? Yeah, what my belief is, I was given this body in a certain condition. I want to return it in the condition I got it in. For me, that's a form of doing good work, call it worship, whatever you want to call it, right? And so it's and then to teach all those things that I learned to other people. So what is biological age? Yeah, your passport tells you how old you are, right? Inside, whether it's elasticity of the cardiovascular system, so how malleable is that tissue, there's a genetic expression, so how are your genes actually regulating themselves and expressing through something called methylation, which you can measure, this big complicated algorithm that tells you your biological age. Then there's something called glycan aging, which is, there's glycans that literally are, in short, slowly cooking your cells and aging them, right? And so how cooked are you, essentially? And then there's telomeres, which is how much damage have your cells received. So in my case, reversing age, which was not the intention, it was a byproduct. I didn't even realize until I tested, right? When I started, when I was 38 years old, my biological age, when I was still sick, started fixing things, biological age was 43. I'm now 45 years old and I'm tested as 33. And it's been 33 for the last 3 years, right? So again, not a vain intention. It's more like what's possible, right? What can we actually do here so I can teach other people that need the help? So the whole goal there is 120 does seem to be very possible. You don't need to spend $2 million a year. What you need to do is understand the threats to you and then what you're wired for, right? I'll give you an example that paints a picture of how even the thing that you think is healthy may hurt you, right? And that will help people understand how the habits are the key to all of this. It's, you don't need to add stuff. You need to remove what you weren't wired for. That will get you to 120. Then all these things that we're trying to add, all the cold plunge, red light, all this stuff, that should be life extension, right?
Past 120.
That should be like, how do we push further, right? But we already have this in us. So give me an example. There's a tennis player I was working with. Our company, he had approached us, U.S. Open, Wimbledon level player, right? That anyone would know their name. And he was told while still playing at Wimbledon, U.S. Open level, you need a cholesterol pill.
Like a Lipitor?
A statin, a Lipitor, right?
Yeah.
Like, why? Best training, best food, like, why would I have a cholesterol issue, right? So that's when they sent him to us thinking there must be some genetic issue. Let's figure this out. So we showed them there's no genetic issue. There's genomics. So here's his wiring. Let's map him out. And then habits that were not aligned to the way he was mapped. This did not need to happen. And in fact, it can be reversed. So your mitochondria, every one of your cells has mitochondria in it. This is a tool that your cell uses to draw on the oxygen that you just breathed, the nutrition in your bloodstream to create energy. Cellular energy and the energy you feel. And when you use oxygen to make energy, you make something called an oxidant. An oxidant is a free radical that causes inflammation. And there's a pathway, genetic pathway that's meant to get that out of your body, remove it, clear it, just like a chimney pulls smoke out of a fireplace, right? What if you don't have a chimney? What if your genetics are like blocked and clogged, like this guy was? He was in a role where he was in high oxidative stress. Running, training, training, taking in a lot of oxygen, meaning more oxidants with a genetic pathway that do not remove the oxidants, starting to cause inflammation. Now we look at the hardware side. There's a gene called 9p21, where if you look at your cardiovascular system and you take the arteries, and if I were to splice an artery, look at that tube, the inner lining is called the endothelium, right? So it's this membrane, which that's what the blood actually touches, right? This membrane. He had the worst quality version of that membrane. We can predict this genetically. So his process of the mitochondria and the hardware. So where this bad process of removing oxidants caused the inflammation first was this bad hardware, right? Started to inflame this tissue. And eventually, just like what I said about the brain, body deploys cholesterol to start fixing this tissue. When the cholesterol meets the free radical that caused the damage in the first place, it also gets damaged. It also oxidizes.
Yeah, there's like flywheel effect at his body. Okay.
Exactly. And now he was fueling this flywheel with his habit of training, overtraining. So what we had to show him was two things. Let's fortify this endothelium. There's certain nutrients that if you were to take them for 6 months, it's as if you had the good version of the gene. Resilient, right? Let's fortify the mitochondria. Let's add some nutrients that make up for your bad genes, and let's change your training. Get into more resistance, get into more active recovery, yoga, Pilates type stuff. Then the little bit of oxidative stress during the game, you're good, right? He no longer needed a pill.
Amazing,
right? The true belief that I now have this disease and medication managing it versus what caused it. Let's pick apart all these little flywheels and start fueling them with the wrong things.
I think that, the work you do is fabulous. I just don't think that a lot of people think that way. I don't think a lot of people think like what causes. I think people I know a lot of people that suffer for years with these inflammations, with these like gut issues. They have no idea. They're trying to switch their diet and they have no idea what to do. And again, the issue is like you'll go online and a lot of people, I think, attribute a lot of their problems to like their diet. That's kind of like the go-to. And then you can play around with that and you can try and fix that. But I don't think a lot of people really understand the effect that your environment, your stress can have on your body. Like truly, truly understand it. And even I was listening to you with Evan Carmichael.
Right, yeah.
And you were speaking about like some of the clothing that you wear, and like forever chemicals that go into your body. So if you're going to just list out, I think it's very important, because I think people have like a grasp on food and how important it is. And even like the bacteria in your gut and how it breaks it down, and you have to have this whole process. But maybe speak about just some of the environmental factors that people may not think about, that could impact you in a negative way.
I would say the big one is EMF, so electronic pollution, right? And I'm saying that while we're sitting in a studio. I know I'm really, but it's really the signal, so the Wi-Fi and those types of signals. So EMF, the data that we have that tells us that a cell phone is safe hasn't been updated since the 1980s. What did a cell phone look like in the 1980s? Right? It was a brick.
It was a brick.
It wasn't a 5G supercomputer, which now signals a cell phone tower 900 times a minute, 15 times a second. It's like you're making 15 phone calls per second in your pocket, right? The safety data on these cell phones from the 1980s was very intentionally done on military men that are 6'4" tall plus, 6'4" right? Meaning that their skulls were super thick.
How do you even use a 6'4" person as a sample size of a population? I'm like 6'2", and I'm already like the tallest guy in Miami. Like, like not a normal height.
This is where, a study can prove whatever you want, right? And if your intention is to get this stuff to market, you know how to build a study. And now a female skull, which is half that thickness, a child's skull, which is 1/4 of that thickness, cannot handle any of what's, and again, hasn't been updated since the 1980s, so it's not even the same.
Not only the wrong avatar for the actual test, like we're not all just walking around like Scandinavians, let's say, but also just the amount of radiation. I guess, is it radiation or?
It's, radiation, EMF. So EMF, what the danger is, these waves most waves are meant to pass through your body. These stick, right? So it's like any other toxin.
So it's like the forever chemicals that you will get from clothes, like fast fashion clothes, but just in
a digital form. Yeah.
Oh, that's terrifying.
The modern version, right? And so they stick and they linger and cause inflammation. It's ubiquitous. It's everywhere, right? It's literally everywhere. So some strategy around, first of all, hygiene, right? Like what do you do when you're at home and turning the Wi-Fi off when you're sleeping? Some strategy around neutralizing. There's devices you can like plug in the wall that will take that wave and allow it to pass through your body, right? There's even devices you can wear. You've seen people put stickers on their phones and things. What does that thing do? Well, it literally neutralizes the wave so that it's not hitting you, but passing through you. That one simple thing, there's research that just came out of India, and India is researching this better than anyone right now. Of children now, our current teenage children have a 418% increase in brain cancer and brain tumors. So they're saying, like, these are the kids that have now been on the iPads for 10 years, right? So so just to know that that's a big one. I would say another one that is under the radar and affects now men even more so than we ever saw, but mostly women, is all the hormone disruption. So everything we said, the chemicals, the food, etc., not only the inflammation it causes the way we know, but how it messes up your hormone system. So what they do is these chemicals that enter your body, say you went outside and breathed some pesticides, hormone disrupting. When the chemical enters your body doesn't recognize what it is and assumes it's estrogen. So it allows it to utilize an estrogen docking station. And it's not estrogen. So there's no signal. There's no hormone signal. So you're not getting the signal for the job that estrogen is supposed to do. And the actual estrogen you're making is now free flowing in your bloodstream, causing inflammation.
Is this why you see like testosterone decline in men?
This is why you're seeing, look at all these memes, you're seeing it, look at a schoolyard today versus the 1950s, right? All that hormone disruption. This is why you're seeing in women, 80% of, like I said, dementia, 80% of autoimmune cases, you name the big stuff, it's hitting women much harder. How many women are complaining of anxiety and depression, right? Because their hormones are completely messed up and they can't fire the way they're supposed to fire. And yes, for men, they're not men anymore, right? And I mean that in terms of behavior, mood, vitality, energy levels, libido, muscle tone, fat, being able to burn fat off your body. It doesn't look like that anymore because your hormones are messed up.
I just want to take a quick break and thank the HubSpot Podcast Network for supporting Success Story for the past few years. Now, the HubSpot Podcast Network has other incredible podcasts like My First Million. Now, if you are an entrepreneur or you are ready to turn your entrepreneurial dreams into millions, you have to listen to My First Million. It's a show that is revolutionizing business podcasting. It's hosted by Sam Parr, Sean Purry. This is a HubSpot Podcast Network original. It brings you unfiltered conversations with self-made millionaires who actually tell you how they did it. If you want to learn how Alex Hormozi built his fitness empire, or how Sofia Amoruso turned nasty girl into a fashion phenomenon. These aren't just success stories, they're the blueprints for your own journey to the top. Each episode breaks down the exact strategies and hidden opportunities that you can use right now. Don't just dream about your first million, learn how to make it. Listen to My First Million wherever you get your podcasts. I mean, that's unnerving, but if you go through this process, and you understand not just your genetics, but your genomic, and you go through the testing process, you built a company around this, a DNA company. When you look at the environmental factors that impact your hormones and your health and well-being, are there universal ones that, you mentioned some right there, but are there other universal ones that we should be considering outside of, I'm pretty sure everyone does not willingly expose themselves to pesticides. They obviously don't want that. Everyone's trying their best. You mentioned EMF and you mentioned some devices, but are there other things maybe even in the food that we eat or the clothes that we wear that impact our hormones that are just sort of best practices across the board, not just tailored to one particular person?
I would say your personal care products. So all these fragrances, there's a study that just came out of this university in Belgium 2 months ago saying that the indoor air quality of American homes is now 4 to 5 times worse than outdoor pollution. And the homes haven't changed. What's changed is when you add up the soap, shampoo, conditioner, fabric softener, sunscreen, each having their own unique set of chemicals and fragrances. And the fragrances are really the problem. And you live in a drywall box that doesn't breathe and your windows are closed. The accumulative total effect is far beyond what we can tolerate, right? So that's a big one. So there's a non-for-profit called the Environmental Working Group. I would go to their website, and if that's one thing everybody does today, just learn what you need to toss in the trash, right? What's hurting you slowly that you didn't realize when you add it all up together. The other big one I would say is mold. People don't realize 50% of American homes now have mold in them, and it's whether you see it or not. It's in the drywall, maybe in ceiling tiles. Our schools are full of mold. And the mold that enters your body, again, there's different genetics on how people push that out. And some people do a good job, some people do a bad job. If you're doing a bad job, you're going to, again, anxiety, gut issues, chronic pain, all sorts of stuff that never gets blamed at mold. They all get treated as separate siloed diseases, right? So those are a couple big ones. I would also say, when I think about habits that you wouldn't normally lean on. When you look at Okinawa, Japan, one of the big things they point to is their brain. And this is one of the most studied blue zones. And what they point success to from why they got to old age is what they call ikigai. And ikigai is sense of purpose, meaning that grandma never becomes grandma. Grandma always has a role in the community. Grandma walks the children to school every day. Grandpa picks up the cigarette butts to make sure the community is clean. Grandma sweeps the leaves off the bus stop so everyone's clothes are clean. Sense of purpose. Never retire. Never stop. And not necessarily monetary, but what is my job? How am I woven into this fabric? And because they have a sense of purpose, their brain continually tells their body, I need to stay young. I need to be healthy.
This is a very real phenomenon. Because I think just without understanding any of the science behind it, I always felt that when people retired, they declined.
Yeah.
And I've seen people that work their whole life, then retire, then die in a year. So there's actual science as to why you have to have purpose and you have to have meaning in your life, and you can't just lay on a beach sipping Mai Tais at 55 till 80.
Yeah, and you'll see people that their love of their life dies and then they die a year later in old age, right? Because purpose is gone. So the brain doesn't know what's happening. The brain is relying on your thoughts. And when I say thoughts, the conscious words in your head, you have 40 million brain cells, neural cells in your heart. You have neural cells and a mini brain in your gut. So that instinct that you feel is a form of thought that gets communicated through the vagus nerve up to the brain. The emotion you feel is a form of thought, and your words in your head are a form of thought. These two, the heart and the gut, don't lie, right? Your emotion and instinct are always honest and true. So are you on that path of purpose or not? And if you're not, you can be sitting on the beach in the Mai Tai feeling okay, but if you feel lost, if you feel like you're not connected, if you feel like there's no healthy relationship, all these things, the heart and brain don't lie, and that's what your brain starts to receive. It's like, okay, I guess I'm done here, right? Versus I need to keep going, sense of purpose. And then what that does for mitochondria, energy in your brain. Your brain has the second highest density of mitochondria in your body after your heart. So signaling what we call mitogenesis, new mitochondria, new energy, new resilience, relies on what are your habits? Do you need it or not? And your body will give you exactly what you're asking for.
We spoke briefly about like the food that you eat and how that affects your health and well-being, and people still they get that. But how reliable is the body? For example, if I start a keto diet and I feel like I have a little bit more energy or whatnot, how reliable is that feeling in terms of, is this diet good for me?
So this is where a lot of people get stuck. Whenever you make a big change like that, everybody feels great in the first couple of weeks. Keto, vegan, low carb, whatever you do, right? A big part of what you're doing is you're also going clean. You're cutting out all the nonsense, right? So inflammation comes down, brain fog goes away, joints feel better. If you have suboptimal ability to convert that fat into fuel, so there's a gene called ApoA2 that's responsible to turn saturated fat into fuel. You're still going to feel good in the first couple of weeks because you're getting into ketosis, ketones in the brain feels so good. About 6 to 8 weeks into it, you're going to start to get brain fog. Your hormones are going to start to get dysregulated. You're going to start to experience fatigue. You're going to have mood issues, but you're not going to blame the diet because it felt so good in the first 2 weeks.
And something else happened.
Something else. And you're going to believe, I have anxiety, I have fatigue. Oh, I have an autoimmune condition. That's what a doctor's going to call it, right? And where we see this the most is in veganism. Hate to say that, but it's true, right? Where the genetics of what it takes to actually make the enzymes to break down plant proteins, to be able to use spinach as fuel, most of us aren't doing well there. Right? The genetics of being able to actually maintain the gut microbiome diversity to eat those foods, most of us genetically aren't doing well there.
Would there be an issue with incomplete amino acids too?
Yeah. So if you can't use a protein, how are you building? And this is where you see, sometime a few months into it, like muscle tone changes. There's like a sucked in skeletal kind of look going on, right? And so you literally don't have the amino acid activity to build yourself. Those are building blocks, right? So if you can't convert the protein, use it as fuel, you're peeing and pooping it out, underutilized, your body will struggle and suffer. And so it usually takes about 2 years before someone gets really sick. Like literally nobody can figure out.
By that point, they're not attributing it to the diet.
Not at all, because it feels like all these diseases, right? The symptoms are so vastly expressed now, feels like diagnosable diseases. So, and by that time, and where did I learn this first? There's an oncologist in California that we work with on unique and rare breast cancer cases where the pathology is crazy. Like, let's figure this out, right? And so she started to struggle, right? And one thing she recommends to every single breast cancer patient is go vegan, right? And so she started to struggle. We couldn't figure out. So I went back and said, tell me about your diet. And she said, no, we just didn't want to go there, right? Finally, we went there. I said, the day you got sick was the day you became vegan. And it took time to get there. So that's where we learned it. And it was implementing that in more people. We're seeing this reversal of these autoimmune chronic disease type symptoms simply because they can't break these foods down.
Is there, without understanding somebody's unique circumstances and who they are as a person, is there a diet that is sort of like a best practice across the board for everyone? You mentioned whole foods, but are there other parts of that diet that people should consider, like certain supplementation that is just for 99% of the population and net positive?
I would say baseline, if you don't know what you're doing, start paleo. Paleo is clean and will give you the nutrients you need that very few people aren't getting what they need. But consider that because our soil is oversprayed, the soil is dead, and the one thing we're missing from even the best food is minerals. It's very hard to get minerals from food today. Your food, the belief is you are what you eat. It's really you are what you ate, right? Because the fruit is something that draws minerals from the roots of the tree and puts it into the context you can actually consume, right? And so if the soil is dead, you're not getting what you might still get the sugar, you might still get some vitamins, but you're not getting minerals. And this is where a lot of people are struggling. If you take the minerals out of your body, all that's left is a puddle of water, literally. Right. And so there's so much more bone density issues, women with osteopenia. Now we're seeing so many more men that get into their 50s with osteopenia and osteoporosis because of lack of minerals. So that's the one thing I think everyone needs to add as a supplement.
Very good. I want to talk about, because this is very interesting. Actually, when your PR rep or your publicity rep reached out and she was trying to organize this podcast, the sort of like the thesis for the show was around how there's like brain chemistry and these genetic markers for like optimal entrepreneurship and optimal work performance. And I thought that was fascinating because some of the stuff that you speak about, I've heard before. I've never heard anyone speak about this before, but this was something like that sort of impacted your journey. So you understood your brain chemistry and how it impacted your ability to be an entrepreneur. And I want to learn a little bit more about that. And then I want to learn how we can use it. Because I don't know how to use that when I'm hiring somebody, but that's fascinating.
Yeah, so this was a big aha moment for us because everything I did, I think this is why it required somebody from the outside coming in, asking the right questions that didn't have a sort of predetermined idea of what genetics was.
Yeah.
Right. And so for me, it was just solving problems, right? That like, how can I use this to solve problems? And one of the problems for me was I was sick. But second is bad relationships in the workplace, right? That was another problem. Literally to the point where one of my co-founders was found crying in a corner and we're like, what's going on here? Friction, 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 right? Yeah. So what I learned was the neurochemicals of the brain, they equal your behavior. And there's very specific genes that determine how much you make, how much you bind, how long they last. And with that, your perception and how you behave. So if I take me as an example, there's a gene that's called DRD2 that determines how effectively you can bind dopamine. So dopamine is this thing that's released to allow you to feel satisfaction, pleasure, eat some nice food, you get dopamine, sign a contract, make a deal, achievement, you get dopamine, right? Scroll on your phone, you're also getting dopamine. That's how those products work and can keep you addicted. But it's that dopamine hit satisfaction. Now, there's another gene that makes a protein that gets the dopamine out of your head because eventually you need to come back to your default baseline, right? So this DRD2 gene, I have the worst version of, and the protein, I have the best version of. So worst version, I feel it way down here. The intensity is far too low, and the protein is way too fast. So it gets rid of it too quickly. So for me, I can't get no satisfaction, right? I'm wired for that. And so the academic answer is I'm wired for depression. But am I depressed right now? No, I have been, right? It's also you're wired for addiction. I'm not addicted to anything right now, but I have been, right? It's also what we've learned, which academia doesn't say, is you're wired for achievement. This is what we call warrior genetics. I'm wired to pull the tribe forward and fight through anything because the pace at which my brain is moving and the amount of risk I'm willing to take, right? I am the warrior. One of my co-founders had the exact opposite profile. The maximum dopamine expression and the slowest possible clearance. We're both at extremes. And so for him, one word to describe him, content. Things are good. Don't need it. I'm constantly satisfied. So me and him in a meeting, it's like, for me, high anxiety, list of 10 things with all the micro notes and every little nuance of all things. And for him, it's like, yeah, give me the list. He's like, no problem. Goes and starts looking up vacations and starts chatting with his friends. Like, no desire to get it done. But the one or two things that gives him an elevated sense of reward, which he's not used to feeling because he's just kind of content, he ends up binging. Can't stop because the clearance is so slow, right? So what we learned is that he's the expert. He's the guy that needs to go figure it out and binge and do a deep, high quality work. And I'm the execution guy. Give it to me to just rip through whatever challenge we have and make it happen, right? And now where we used to have friction, we now had this beautiful symbiotic relationship where we knew what we were supposed to do. And I can keep going talking about the brain for the whole day in terms of all the neurochemicals and how it forms who we are and how we perceive.
When you do these tests, you can, without even knowing the person, pretty accurately describe exactly how they operate.
Yeah, I would do this work with, so right now I'm working with a COO from a global brand, like 50,000 employees plus type of company, right? For this exact purpose. Who are you, right? Why are you good at your job? And who do you need around you that you're not good at, right? And who should be the CEO? Who should be the CFO? And these other people, why is there friction? And so just mapping that, and imagine what happens when everyone does the job that they're genetically wired for versus doing something that is the exact opposite of your wiring, like my co-founder was doing. You start to use words like anxiety, depression, burnout. Burnout was one of my big issues. That's why I was sick, because it's so easy for me to take on so much. My brain doesn't have a challenge. My body can't keep up. So I was making myself sick with cortisol. So now I learn how to structure my days so I don't kill myself.
Now, if I'm trying to hire people, I cannot be doing genetic tests on every employee and figuring out where they're going. I mean, maybe you could, but is there, I mean, there's so many different frameworks for hiring and like, there's like disc profiles. And I mean, there's a variety of different ways. Are any of them accurate at all that can find some level of sort of insight into their genetics or how they're wired? Like what's good, what's a waste of time?
The only difference between all that stuff and genetics is DNA doesn't lie, right? Someone's perception of the question they're asking in a form, and as honest as they're trying to be, if they're wired for anxiety, the answer you might get is a little different. If they're wired for deep intellectual cerebral thinking, the answer you might get is more than it needs to be. If they're wired like me, they might flow through that thing a little too quick, right? So those things work. There's actually a company that I'm working with right now that does a really good one. I'm trying to take genetic insights and merge it with what they do. They kind of do one-on-one, high-level, very expensive coaching. So it's not mass. Most people haven't heard of it, but it really, really works. So we're putting it all together so that the biology matches what they've learned about behavior. But so they work. The gap is it 99% accurate or somewhere closer to 90 because you can't control how someone perceives the questions.
Okay. And is there, when you get these results back and you understand sort of like the best role for you or how you should operate, does that mean that like some people should just work within companies because of their risk profile, and some people should never be entrepreneurs, and some people are sort of destined to be entrepreneurs? So all of this is very valid then.
Yeah, I can tell you. So I host master classes, right? Where people show up with their DNA, 50 people, 100 people, and we spend a whole day together, and I go through every little aspect of the genome. And one of the games we play is I'm going to go through the mood and behavior, and I'm going to tell you what job you're good for. And it usually ends up, that's what I do, right? You are wired to be a nurse or a school teacher because you are so reliable and dependable. You're not reward seeking, but you're also not trying to overdo the job. You're going to do what needs to get done. So you're going to do a job that's sort of somewhat independent, right? There's no boss watching over you, but you're also not an entrepreneur that's building something out of it. That's exactly what I do. And it just keeps happening over and over again. So DNA doesn't lie, and our ability to now interpret it, because I've met with thousands of people from billionaire hedge fund managers all the way down to stay-at-home mom, everybody, right? That we know what it all means. So it doesn't lie, and I can tell you more about who you are than you know yourself, right? And I don't need to ever meet you to describe your personality to a T and tell you who you are. And there's all these aha moments. Oh, that's why. Now I get it.
So this is, I mean, I guess not to shill the product, but if somebody's trying to figure out why there's this discord in their life and they're not happy with where they're at, like this is a great way to figure out what you should be stepping into.
Yeah, in terms of, so we are meant to be happy. We're meant to be successful. We're meant to thrive. All of that stuff happens when you're doing the thing that you're not wired for, like me and my business partner were doing, right? And this is the work we do. So but all of a sudden, if you find your superpower, and all of these things that equal the bad way you feel are actually your genetic superpower. They're the thing that you're supposed to be using as a tool that's now in the wrong context. I'll give you another simple example. We did some work with the Navy SEALs, right? So in that work, their question is, why with the same training, same food, same everything, some of these guys get PTSD and some don't? I said, well, the answer is in your question. Same food, same. They're not the same people. Their neurology is different. So we showed them that, okay, limb gets torn off, bomb goes off, major impactful stimulus, which could potentially equal a trauma. And it's negative, so your body's wired to hold on to that to remember, not make that mistake again. That's how our genes work, right? So the adrenaline response that ensues after that impactful stimulus, the genes of how we regulate adrenaline are unique to each one of us. And some of us do a really good job. So when we experience a big impactful thing, the imprint that we receive to make sure we protect ourselves from it, which is the purpose of the imprint, which is what our biology does, is intellectual. For some people that do a bad job regulating adrenaline, the imprint is emotional. So not only do they remember the information, but they also remember how it felt. And the next time they see something they're reminded, they feel it again as if it's happening again. Very powerful adrenaline imprint.
PTSD.
That's PTSD.
Yeah.
Now, if you add on top of that, there's genes around neuroplasticity, how effectively you develop your brain. And whenever you learn a new skill, experience a new concept, have a new belief, you need new hardware in your brain, a specific location to process that new thing, right? So BDNF determines how effectively you build these neurons. If you don't do such a good job and you're going through a moment of impactful stimulus, you don't have the neurons to process it. There's one guy already running away, planning what to do next, and there's another guy shocked, shell shocked, frozen, right? Still processing, which means that that thing you experience has a lot of weight and meaning, right? So there's one thing to have trauma, and there's another thing to have trauma where the thing means a lot, that's the person that needs medication all of a sudden. Versus if I had their DNA prior to this, I could have told you, don't deploy them. That's not the person that's meant to go out.
But is the answer don't deploy them or supplement to fill?
Either or, right?
Okay.
So it's this gene is broken, doesn't work. Now I either need to block and remove the things that hurt me or add something to support my biology so I can actually go do that thing. And both work.
I mean, so this applies to literally, I mean, there's no circumstance where testing does not give you just a better view of like who you are. I mean, to draw another example from your own life, you've tested your own kid's DNA, and now that influenced your parenting style. So just walk me through like how you parent differently now that you know how your kids.
So they're not wired the same, right? Even as much as they're my children, they're not wired the same. One of them, I was told he has ADHD. A teacher, a very specific teacher, said he has ADHD. I was like, okay, we're going to break this nonsense down a little bit, right? And so I looked at who is a teacher.
You're not the dad to mess with when you're diagnosing your kid.
So literally telling me, take this kid to the doctor to get medication. That's where it was being pushed to. So what did I discover? So I wasn't looking for ADHD in his DNA. I was looking again for the context, the environment, all this stuff. And I was just looking for what's broken in the biology that was screaming red flag, and how does that equal the problem he's describing? Or she was describing, the teacher. So what I found was amylase activity, this enzyme that your body needs to break down starches. He did the worst job. The ability to use starch and carbs as fuel, horrible for him. TCF702, how it regulates your insulin response. So he does a bad job of breaking down carbs and starches. He has the worst possible insulin regulation genetics. And this was the teacher right after lunch. Right after he just finished eating his South Asian traditional food with a bowl of rice, in a coma, literally carb coma, right? And so he quit. It was not that he couldn't pay attention. He was literally in a coma, right? He wasn't there. Now, other teachers started to agree with this, that he has ADHD. Once you hear it, you start to look for it.
So interesting how that works.
And so what I look for then is what could be his behavior that would even 1% point to them seeing something that they agree with. So serotonin is a mood regulating neurochemical. It allows you to behave as appropriate for whatever is going on, right? He has bad serotonin dysregulation, so he can't actually manage his behavior and his mood equal to the level of stimulus. He's more up and down, right? And the mechanism of that is serotonin allows your brain to prioritize stimulus. Here's all what's going on. Can I focus with you right now? Am I distracted by the camera or the light or whatever, right? So here's serotonin dysregulated, which means when he's in the classroom, it's not that he has ADHD and can't pay attention. It's that he has hyperattention and is noticing everything that his teacher doesn't even know is going on, right? When the teacher says, I'm writing this on the chalkboard, and uses a different font or a different letter or a different thing that they didn't use, he's also reading into that. It's like, why'd you do that? They're like, why can't you pay attention? Like, I am, but you're not paying attention to what you're writing, right? So he's seeing the world at a higher level of detail, and that gets equated to ADHD. And what it is look at the best lawyers, the best forensic auditors, the best hedge fund managers that need to see every little thing and not make a mistake. This is how they're wired.
And then what the healthcare system will do will just medicate. So when you give when somebody like a person, your kid is in a situation, you give him Adderall, what is that actually doing? Because it's not solving the actual problem by any means at all.
Major band-aid, right?
Yeah.
That's suppressing his superpower. His superpower is his ability to see the world at a higher level of detail. And he's not meant to sit in the middle and operate at that level. So it's two things. Teaching the kid or yourself or whoever is how you're wired. And I can tell you, having done this so many times, just the awareness of knowing that this is how I'm wired, and then going back to that same context and you start to see it.
Yeah.
And then you start to see the opposite in other people. And then the friction goes away because you know how now to deal with them and communicate with them, and you have that empowerment. That's half of it. And the other half is there are times where I'll give him a supplement or I'll work on his diet, and there's something called 5-HTP, which regulates serotonin. Yeah, you've heard, right?
Yeah.
So it allows you to upregulate your serotonin. So suppose it is exam day or there's a new teacher or whatever. Okay, he's going to take some 5-HTP.
So when you talk about supplementation, this is really interesting, because I always thought that supplementation had effects in the long term. Like it's like, I mean, if you supplement for 6 months at a certain level, then obviously it's going to make some changes, and it's going to make you a little bit healthier, whatever you're trying to accomplish. So you're saying that even in a 24-hour period, supplementation can have that dramatic an impact.
Depends what you're working on. Neurochemicals is in the moment, it's instant. And just the same, it fades away instantly, right? You're not curing anything. What you're doing is I don't do a good job of binding serotonin. My receptors don't work. That's who you are genetically. I can add more serotonin, so there's more to bind, but as soon as that's gone, you go back to who you were.
So there's no permanent fix that's going to accumulate over supplementing for the next 5 years.
The permanent fix is finding your superpower and being that person.
Understood.
Right? Then I need to go on vacation, Christmas dinner, tone things down. That's when I can temporarily be who I want to be. But there's other areas where, yeah, if you want to fix your endothelium or your inflammation, that will take months and months and months. So it depends what you're supplementing for.
Understood. I'm curious because, I mean, you live in this world and we're talking about your kids and you've already had the kids. So we're not talking about gene editing or anything like that at this level. But is that something that will eventually be possible?
So gene editing works today. Yeah, it just, the allowance of the things that we know we can fix isn't allowed yet. So there's one gene editing protocol that the FDA has allowed, and it's to repair a eye issue, an eye disease, which is genetically driven, and it works, right?
And what stage do they do that at?
So it can be done at any stage, because now it's a question of, is the hardware damaged? That's a different problem to solve, right? So how far did it progress? In terms of stopping the fire that's fueling it, which is the broken gene that's communicating the wrong signal, that you can edit and change. Now, what we are seeing more of, rather than editing, because FDA and just how do you take, okay, local eye issue, no problem. How do you get your 50 trillion cells to all receive that signal and make a change all instantaneously at the same time? That's where we're a little stuck. So instead, what we're seeing are gene therapies, which are, instead of editing the gene, there's a signal, a protein in your body that is changing the way the gene operates. Kind of like if I take the supplement, I change the level, but if I stop taking the supplement stops. So these gene therapy lasts like 2 years. The signal just keeps going and going for 2 years. Those exist, and people are starting to experiment on the anti-aging longevity type stuff. But you'll see, Goldman Sachs says by 2030, the genetic therapeutic industry is going to be a 4 trillion plus industry, which is bigger than the entire healthcare industry right now. So we're going to see, hey, Alzheimer's, injection, right? Cardiovascular disease, injection, gene editing.
So it's not even gene editing for like a fetus. It's gene editing at any point.
You can literally splice, remove, connect, and the signal is called.
What I was talking about, I thought you could manipulate like the genes of a child before it's even born, and that would be what people are focusing on. Like they pick the attributes that they like.
Yeah, so earlier you can start, the better to prevent disease. So that is where it's going to go for sure, right? But even for you and I sitting here, you have this Alzheimer's worry.
Yeah.
Splice the gene, cut it out, right? But even then, if you do everything wrong, you're still going to cause the brain inflammation. What we're saying is now you have less, you have the protection that you didn't have before. So your body is able to fight it. But if you go do every single thing wrong, you're still going to cause it.
Yeah.
Right? So the lifestyle and environment will never be out of the mix.
When you listen to this, all of it makes a ton of sense, and I can see how this could be super valuable for people. But when you talk about preventative and you talk about gene editing to remove the chance of you even having these diseases, these chronic issues, I mean, you are still going up against a healthcare system that is rooted in sick care. So what is the strategy, even for you as somebody who's building a business in this space, to sort of revamp the whole healthcare system and the whole pharmaceutical, like this is like an industrial complex that you're fighting against. And I mean, I've heard of people now, medical tourism, not for like cosmetic surgery, but going to like Panama for stem cells and whatnot. These are very popular things because it seems like the US is very behind, and also the money is not focused on improving and preventative and all the things you're talking about. So what are your thoughts on like where the future of US healthcare is going? How do we remove these incumbents?
So it's not so much that the US is behind, it's that the FDA is really ahead of getting rid of things that work, right? Because you got 18,000 employees there, like what the hell do they do, right? Everyone's sick. They're what they do is, you can see the outcome. Make sure things just keep going the way they are. So peptides, a lot of people are starting to use peptides now. Such a simple, basic, easy thing to do. And there's, where we're sitting in Florida, clinics are being raided by the FBI and being shut down because they're using peptides. Because they work. That's the problem, right? So, yes, you go to Panama, you go to Colombia, you go to wherever, get these regenerative type stuff done. So what we are seeing now, there's too much pressure post-COVID. The moat used to be your insurance doesn't pay for it, right? You're stuck in the system. People don't care anymore. People are paying out of pocket. And there's now 40,000 functional medicine doctors in the United States, right? So that movement is growing because people know what I don't even care if my insurance covers it. I'm just going to be stuck in this sick care system
I'll tell
forever.
you something. As a Canadian,
Yeah.
I mean, coming down here and trying to figure out U.S. Insurance, anyways, I mean, I was paying. I think last year, this year we just we paid every time we went in for an appointment because last year I spent 12 grand, and every time I went to a doctor, I still paid something, and I'm like, I haven't had 12 grand worth of things happen to me, so I'm like, I'll put my money somewhere else for my health. Like I don't know, I'll hire a personal trainer, get a chef to come into the house for 12 grand. Like, I mean, okay, fine. God willing, you don't have a heart attack or get hit by a car. But outside of that, it's incredibly expensive and it's convoluted and you never know what you're actually getting when you buy. And I'm a Canadian saying this, and I'll ask my American friends, like, do you understand what you actually get with your insurance? And half of them are saying no. So, I mean, it's a really fucked up system. It's a very fucked up system.
It's not what we think it is. Insurance is not insurance. Insurance is administration of your healthcare plan. So they profit from everything you do, right? So it's also their desire that you're sick. So yeah, so where is it going? These guys know that it's inevitable that tech is advancing and there's too many people talking about it and you can't block the podcast and you can't, it's happening. So they're taking the stuff and they're making it part of their system. So as an example, there's a company called Designs for Health it's probably the leading supplement company that functional medicine doctors use. So if you go in with Lyme disease, some complicated thing, it's always a Design for Health supplements they use. That's the first choice, right? Just got bought out, but I think it was Glaxo, one of the big pharma companies. Not because, and the first threat is, oh, they're going to change everything or not. No, they're actually trying to study this stuff. Like, what do these guys know about disease that we don't know? Because we never bothered studying root cause. And eventually you're going to see there's going to be root cause pills, right? They're not going to change their model. They just know there's too much pressure. So instead of competing with these guys, let's just become these guys.
Yeah. Well, it's good. It's good that there's pressure because I mean, I don't think that it's interesting. We've all found ways to live longer, but we're not living longer in good health.
Exactly. Yeah.
So great. You live to 80, 85. And I mean, we're talking like my family I think my grandpa was 97 when he passed. My grandma's like 96 now, and she's still pretty good. But I mean, if you look at even like middle America, I mean, I don't know if you know the stats. I don't know off the top of my head, but I mean, people aren't living to 70 and 80. I think that there's some parts of the US even where 65 is when people are dying.
Yeah, there's lots of pockets. Like you look at this area called Cancer Alley, which is where all the petroleum production happens, right in the south. Cancer rates, I think 4 to 6 times, depending which type of cancer. 10-year reduction in life expectancy. So we know it's because of the chemical exposure. We know what's causing it, right? So in as much as you add that takes 10 years away, what can you do to get another 10 years? It's so simple, right?
If people wanted to understand like which tests are the most important tests to start with, like just to go down this rabbit hole and start discovering, because if they do, they'll probably find a lot of different people to do a lot of different tests, telling them a lot of different things. What should they look for? What's credible? What's not? I think that's always like the concern when people move away from like Western medicine and talking to their GP about something. It's like, I just got to find people on the internet shit. What's good? What's not?
So I would say who is it coming from? That's a big deal, right? No, I don't mean the company, I mean the provider. A good functional medicine doctor. There's a body called the IFM, the Institute for Functional Medicine. So if somebody's graduated from there, you know that they know what to do, right? There's FDN, I think the Functional Diagnostic Network, and there's clinicians that have been trained by them. So if you know that they came from one of these two places, they know what they're doing when it comes to lab work and they're not shooting in the dark, right? And typically, there's not that many labs that are used. There's, Vibrant Labs, there's Great Plains. There's a few functional lab companies that all the functional medicine doctors use because they'll give you the data that, going to LabCorp, you're nowhere near learning what your body's really doing. But I would say it's more about who did it come from. IFM, FDM, these people know what they're doing.
And if somebody like actually connects with you, like what's the process they go through? So like actually lay out the testing that you do. And I mean, now you sort of do counseling and you help them understand the results.
So what I do now, because of people asking me to do this over and over again, is I have some clients that are on retainer, right? Some like called pro athletes, celebrity type guys, and that's how I manage them. But because of that, I built a masterclass that allows people to spend an entire day with me. So my goal is three things. Let's identify every single red flag in your DNA. Everything you need to know. Let's identify every recommendation for those things. Your playbook, right? Let's teach you how to interpret your DNA so you never need to ask me another question. Because if I can teach you what it's saying versus the typical medical thing of every time you need help, you have to call me again, right? Your DNA doesn't change. That's the difference between this and every other lab work you're going to do. The DNA you're born with is the DNA you die with. So once you understand what it's telling you, it's just different questions you need to ask. Oh, I'm in fertility stage. I'm in menopause stage. Same DNA, different problems to solve, right? And once you learn what it's telling you about your biology, you're always making the right choice. And imagine what would happen to your health span and your lifespan if you always made the right choice. So yes, that's what I do. And whether somebody just wants to acquire a test and self-serve and go through it, if they want to go deeper, there's a lot of things that I know that the FDA won't let me say in a report, right? Which is why we host these master classes, and then that it can actually speak to people and ask them about their environment and their stress and really get in the nitty-gritty of their personal stuff. So yeah, one-time thing to truly understand how your body works so that everything else you're doing, from your supplements to your blood work, you always do it right.
And this is going to impact your cognitive performance, your work performance, your fertility, your hormone levels, your there's not what colds and viruses you get. So every single component of your life can be impacted by this. When you do these types of tests, the majority of the things that you discover can be fixed, supplemented, optimized. Are there things that you can't fix?
Genetic conditions, meaning if somebody's born with, say, sickle cell syndrome, you have it. And that's where we're waiting for genetic therapeutics. But I can't tell you, I'm still learning. I keep learning. And one big thing that I learned this year, I was working with this musician, this famous guitarist that everyone knows, who now has Parkinson's, right? And I had to tell him, I can't help you because Parkinson's is a genetic condition. You have it. And I started to dig into it, just thinking, okay, how can I help this guy? And I found this data around this military base in North Carolina where the vets from that base have a 30% elevated risk of Parkinson's. Why, if it's a genetic condition? So I started to dig into it, and then I found that the water that they were drinking has a forever chemical in it called TCE, which is from agricultural spill-off. And so it was causing the brain inflammation. So I started to learn, okay, where else do I see this? Then I saw in farmers that there's 13,000 farmers right now that are suing Chevron in a class action lawsuit because they all have Parkinson's from this chemical called paraquat, which is used on beans, lentils, nuts, legumes, that type of thing, like vegan plant proteins, right? Kills all the greenery so the actual crop can thrive. And this neurodegenerative disease that looks and behaves like Parkinson's is actually just caused from their poor genetic ability to deal with that chemical. So I would say genetic conditions can't be helped, but even then, we're finding that most people that think they have a genetic condition don't even have it. One last point about that. There's a lady I was dealing with in Toronto, where we're both from, right, who diagnosed with ALS, taking ALS medication, and she went through our program to say, can you just give me best quality of life? I can't fix this ALS, I know, but let me give it. So to the point where her husband used to carry her up the stairs to take her to bed every day. Dug into it, saw a big red flag in her DNA. There's a process called glucuronidation, which is what your body relies on to remove mold, and she's missing the gene, right? So I said, can we do a mold test? She said, sure. Aflatoxin, all sorts of toxins in her body from mold spores, right? Then she talked about a renovation she did a couple of years before, right? And spores being released from under the kitchen cabinet, whatever. So we detoxified her mold, and she's walking up the stairs, doesn't have ALS anymore, right? So somebody believe all the symptoms equal it. It's like no other way to describe it or explain it at the medical level. Taking medication, not really working. So can't fix genetic conditions, but with all that's going on in our environment, 144,000 chemicals have been added to humanity since the 1970s. So people are struggling with things that they think that they have, they don't even have. So even those can be fixed.
That's what I was going to say. I think that there's a lot of people that, like you mentioned, live with genetic conditions that they're not actually sick.
Yeah.
They're not actually sick, and they're just misdiagnosed, and they live their whole life that way.
We did research on multiple sclerosis, MS, right? And what we found in this study that we're working on, that 26%, I believe, of the women that were enrolled, misdiagnosed. They were just making toxic hormones that caused the same inflammation that led to the same symptomology. And their habits of sunscreen, soap, shampoo, chemicals from cosmetics were overloading that hormone system, equaled the same symptoms. And so they had to get diagnosed with something. It looks like MS, it's MS, right?
you mentioned that, I think at the beginning, you said less than 3% of the markers that we see in these tests can't be solved for. But obviously, when you compare that to the average population, the amount of people that have these chronic diseases, it's much more than 3%. So there's a huge discrepancy there. And this is a symptom of of sick care, of a poorly constructed healthcare system.
The actual number is 90%. So 90% of the healthcare budget is spent on chronic disease, right? So you have the wealth.
Got to think about incentives too.
Yeah. And so you have, think of just this one simple thing, that in the United States, the average healthcare spending per individual is $14,000 a year. In the EU, it's like 5. In Costa Rica, it's $900. And the Costa Ricans are much healthier than Americans. You have the wealthiest empire that's ever existed, which is also the sickest. There's been no nation, no empire ever that is as sick as the United States.
I mean, we went through a lot. What would be some like last words of wisdom, or even something that I didn't ask you that I should have, that you want to leave the audience with?
Yeah, I would say chronic disease is a choice. It's truly optional. It is not innate. It is not, I have diabetes in my family, right? You have bad insulin response and donuts in your family, right? That's what you have. So these are all choices we make. The challenge is, how do I know what to prioritize and what choice I should focus on? Because there's so many things. Just like your brilliant podcast here, there's 1,000 podcasts people can listen to telling you 1,000 different things to do, right? And so where do you prioritize and focus? And that's the key. It is a choice, but you need to do what will actually give you the ROI.
Yeah.
As opposed to a little bit of everything, which potentially could even hurt you, right? And that's all you need to do. It's not a lot. I don't have a crazy biohacking regimen, and I don't have the crazy man caves that you see on all these YouTube videos, whatever.
Not spending $2 million a year.
I don't. It's actually very low budget. I avoid what I know I can't handle. I do what I need to do. And sometimes if I make a mistake, I get a little sick again, right? If I eat the wrong bread, I get a little cocky in terms of how healthy I am. I will get eczema. I will get sick, right? There's no cure to this stuff. Here's my biology, find out what's broken, develop a set of habits for that biology, and I'll be the best version of myself.
I think that when you lay it out so clearly, it's quite obvious. Like, what you're doing is you're showing people all the leading indicators. And I think that traditionally we just focus on lagging indicators of health, and that's not the way to live our best lives. Where should people connect with you? I mean, where do you want people to go? I think you're going to set up a landing page for people for listening to this show.
So Instagram, I have a daily rant about nonsense that's going on and what's broken.
You got some good things on your Instagram too.
Yeah, this is all about what we discover when we're working with people, we're healing people. These are the things that are actually making them sick. So I talk about them every day. But yeah, I'll set up a masterclass just for this community, right? Because I want to make sure that I understand the needs and wants are maybe different than others. So yeah, just go to the landing page. You can get a test from there, or if you want to enroll and work with me for a day, we'll do that just for this group, one with me, and we'll do a deep dive.
I think a lot of people that listen to this, they're all entrepreneurial, and I think that one of the more interesting things for them would be like optimal performance or working with the right people. But I mean, everybody who's entrepreneurial now is trying to figure out how to live longer, how to be healthier. I mean, half the friends that I know are taking peptides. They're like, right now, they're trying to figure out our nootropics, reducing mental fog, increasing mental clarity. Like, just making money is one thing. It's great. But ultimately, you also don't want to die, and you want to live your best life, and you want to be healthy, you want to be happy, you want to not feel stressed out and burnt out all the time. Like, there's a lot of different things that go into this that, I mean, affect the whole population. But I think that entrepreneurs by nature are people that try and like figure shit out, and whether or not it's hacking a business to success or hacking their own life so that they're optimizing at their peak performance. Like, I think this is a great way to do it, because it's not just like, you're not just trying to fix things blind. Now you actually have this roadmap for how you should operate and the things you should include, and your diet and all these, and your environment. And I think that that's something that I think anybody who's ambitious and trying to succeed in life is going to be interested in. So
yeah, you need a place to know your playbook, because the pace, I'm an entrepreneur and I know the pace I'm working at, right? There's no time for downtime, and there's no time to go figure it out. So just, what's that genetic playbook? Don't make a mistake. Follow that guide, and you find the best version of yourself.
Well, I want to go through your program. I want to do it because I'll tell you something. I mean, like, as a podcaster, so what I got to do, what my job is to get into like highly complex conversations with people who have been living in this domain for the past 30 years of their life. And I have to have like a semi-articulate, intelligent conversation with them about shit that they've dealt with and understand so well. So I mean, like, I have to be on. So, I mean, there's days when I have brain fog. There's days when I don't. I've tried different supplements. Some work, some don't. So like, I want to like look under the hood and figure out what's that exact like cocktail or diet or regime, or hopefully there's no mold in this house. We tested it before we moved in, but so I think that's,
Yeah, let's do it.
yeah,
But we have to have a follow-up episode where we expose you as a guinea pig.
100%.
Talk about your deal.
100%. I'm down.
Yeah.
No, I appreciate you, dude. Okay. So, if they want to go, did you drop your social? Where's your handle?
It's Cash Khan official.
Okay, Cash Khan official. Cool.
Okay.
We'll put everything in the show notes
Sure.
too. And I just want to say thanks for coming on.
Pleasure, one is awesome.
Last question I ask everybody, and you can look at this from a health perspective, obviously, because that's where your specialty is, or you can look at it just from like a life perspective. Like one last piece of wisdom or advice that you would tell your younger self.
I would say the literally first thing comes to mind is finding the right person for the job. Meaning what I did was I was very sort of lenient and very forgiving to the people around me, right? And giving far too much than I took, which means that no, you're not supposed to do this. I need an expert to do this, but you're going to do it because you're my friend, right? So and when I started to find the right person for the job and also let the person know that this is not what you do, here's what you're good at. I've just unlocked your superpower. Go do that. And how the exponential change that comes from that. So that's one thing that I wish I learned a lot easier, is that everybody can't do everything. Everybody needs to know who they are and what they do. And when you start to do that and stop doing what you're not good at, complete flip in terms of outcome.
I mean, this what you do, like the testing can actually indicate exactly what you should be doing. So this is not just like an entrepreneurial lesson. This is like understand what you are genetically wired to actually do.
Yeah, now I
your life.
do sort of genotype people as they walk through the door, right? And they kind of screen them, but yeah. So that's a big one for me. That's what I do now.